about one or two big trends that we see happening with those two generations, and then leaving time, half the time, to take questions. We can take that route, or the other route we can do is we can just turn it into a big conversation right now, and you guys can fire questions at me, and we can go that route. So route one, I'm going to give you a little insight, one big trend on boomers and Xers, then questions, or just questions the whole time. What do you want? Hybrid of both? Option number one? Option number one. All right, let's do it. So, first of all, thanks for coming and hanging out. I appreciate it. Did you have fun? Good opening session? Good way to start the week? So we talked about this mega shift, but a lot of that is being driven by millennial generation, but they're not the only part of this puzzle. We still have other generations, and I really want to acknowledge and talk about what's happening here. So first of all, I just want to point out and talk a little bit about our baby boomers, this baby boomer generation. Now, we didn't go deep into this, but we said the first way we define a generation is by age, by birth years, and we broke that down. But the reality of it is you have to go beyond age, obviously. Right? We have to look at the events and conditions that took place during each one of these cohorts' formative years. And our formative years are roughly our teenage years. Social scientists have kind of defined that 14 to 24. And so we kind of study that period of time. In fact, Stanford just came out with this great report looking at generations, and they said that an event that happens when you are 18 is 3 times more impactful than when you're 40. I thought that made sense because an example people will often say when we talk about historical events, 9/11 is a big event that impacted everyone in the world, but particularly here in the U.S. And I'll usually have, it could be an Xer or a boomer, and they'll say, that's not just a millennial thing, that impacted me too. And I would say to them, you're absolutely right. It's not that it didn't influence you, particularly if you're a New Yorker or you lost people, but for someone who's 18, when that happens, it's 3 times more impactful in shaping their formative views on everything from social justice and meaning and politics, religion, how we communicate. And so that's what we study. And so, when we think about boomers and Xers, yes, I defined the org chart, but that's only a part of their story. There's some other things that are playing out with that group. And so just to have some understanding about who boomers are, if we think about big influencing events for the baby boomer generation, and we've got boomers in this room, what comes to mind for you? What are some of the big events? Because I think of them coming in 2 waves. First of all, I think about the 1960s. And when you think of the 60s, what do you think about boomers for influencing events? What was that? The assassination of John F. Kennedy. The moon landing. Moon landing. How many of you boomers can still remember being huddled in a living room, neighbors, watching that, right? This incredibly proud, unbelievable moment? Yes, huge. What else? Vietnam War protests. Civil rights. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Beatles. Rock and roll. Woodstock, right? Counterculture movement. What's that? Your voices. Big time, right? A generation of youth really, for the first time, really challenging the status quo and authority in a big way. So what's interesting to me is the 1960s is literally the social fabric of this country was literally being ripped in half, right? Such a dynamic period of time. But what I love is that for most boomers, you didn't sit back and watch this on the sidelines. You rolled up your sleeves, you got involved, and you fought back. Your voices. And you created some pretty incredible change. Civil rights, voters' rights, women's rights, social liberties that are very easy for us as the younger generation to take for granted. So as a result of creating this incredible change and this massive economic growth, you get a generation that was very idealistic and optimistic, right? We can change the world. Anything's possible. We can put a man on the moon. We said we'd do it in the next decade. Boom, we do it. But then you follow it with the 1970s. So that's not the whole story. That's the romanticized story that gets talked about a lot. But then, especially for younger boomers, what happens in the 1970s? What happens with the economy in the 1970s? Goes in the basement. What happens with inflation? Through the roof. We get what economists called stagflation. Globalization kicks in. We were a much more manufacturing-based economy at that time. Now those jobs are going overseas. And so you have this generation now that's graduating into a world where there isn't this massive boom and explosion of jobs and opportunities. Now there's actually a limited number of opportunities because our economy was not as service-oriented as it is today, coupled with the fact that you had 80 million baby boomers. And so we often overlook the fact that for most boomers, when you came out, you had to scrap and scrape to get into whatever profession you wanted to. And then once in, you did whatever was asked. Because guess what? If you don't want to come early, you don't want to stay late, don't worry. I got 79,999,999 others that are more than willing and happy to take your spot. So what we find out of that comes this huge competitive drive. Have any competitive boomers in this room at all? Any? It's laughable. Fiercely competitive. And when you look historically, boomers starting in their careers, boomers, you bought into a plan, right? Think about it. You bought into a plan, and what was the plan? Get into a good organization, a good institution, a good career path, keep your head down, work hard. I always say we can thank boomers for creating the 100-hour work week. Thank you very much, baby boomers. Incredible work ethic. My generation, we're trying to create the 25-hour work week to balance this out. Yep. Come early, stay late, keep your head down, do whatever's asked of you, put in the time, and eventually you reach that magic number, you're going to be able to ride off into the sunset, and retirement is all going to be fine, it's all going to be taken care of. Just keep your head down, pump the 401k, company pension will be there, don't worry about it. And then what happened? Rules of the game changed, and the rug got pulled out on many baby boomers, right? There was a plan in place, and it's kind of like, dude, I bought into the plan. I did everything I was supposed to. And now, I find myself in this situation. Maybe you lose loss of a career, loss of a job, loss of a home. Like we said, 1 in 7 of this next generation saw one of their parents lose a job. And so there's this trend that's emerging with boomers where we've got a big group who either, they thought they were going to be able to retire, and now they can't. They're looking at an extra 5, maybe 10 years. They don't know if they're going to be able to retire. And it's a trend that's emerging, and you're maybe seeing this. This isn't all boomers because we have some that are still fired up and want to be there, but there's a group that you might be managing, and they've slipped into this category that I call, they have retired without telling you. Can anybody think of anyone that's maybe on your team, in the institution that could possibly fall into that category? Of course. This is why I hope that we could talk about this, because I obviously see it. Judging by your laughter, you've seen it, you've felt it. And so what we have to do is we have to acknowledge that this is happening, and we have to have some real frank discussions around this to make sure that we can re-engage this group if they want to be here. Because we keep saying, and I go from industry to industry that throws out a percentage of boomers that are getting ready to retire, and if they do leave, we can't dismiss all of the wisdom and knowledge and perspective that they have. So how do you potentially re-engage a generation that, an individual that maybe has retired without telling you? They're kind of on autopilot. They're going through the motions. And I guess I'd first just like to throw it out to the group. Does anyone is there anything that you're doing in particular to re-engage or to kind of keep your baby boomers, your 25, 30 plus kind of veterans engaged? Anyone doing anything interesting right now? Because the conversation is always about, millennials. What do we got to do to keep them motivated and engaged? Anybody doing anything with that group? Yes, ma'am. I love that. So she said, we're doing some mentoring with her more senior clerks of court with some of the younger ones that are coming in. Is anyone doing any mentoring type opportunities? A few of you, some of you. So here's my thought on mentoring. And you're maybe doing this, but this would be one of my big pieces of advice. Mentoring comes up a lot. And I get people on both sides of the aisle. Some people are like, we do it, it never really works. It just is kind of this check the box thing for us. They have a coffee and meet once, and then it's like on with the next. A couple things we have to acknowledge when we think about mentoring between baby boomers and this millennial generation. Number one is that mentoring is going to look and feel a lot different than it used to. For most of you, in your mind right now, actually do me a favor. How many of you had a mentor growing up? You had a mentor? Hopefully, if you didn't, it's unfortunate. Can you see that person in your mind right now? Can you think back on who they were? Okay, let me ask you this. Did you go into that relationship thinking, I'm going to teach this person a whole bunch of stuff? I'm going to teach them a lot. Or did you go into it with the mindset of, I'm going to listen and learn everything I possibly can, and they're going to bestow knowledge down to me? That's how most boomers, that's what mentoring looked like. And so now you're asking them to mentor, and they go into that relationship thinking, I am going to be the mentor. I'm going to teach you and tell you my wisdom. And the millennial is like, oh, cool. So this is going to be like an exchange, and I'm going to teach you a whole bunch of stuff like I teach my parents, and right? It's going to be this. And that boomer colleague that you tapped is like, this little punk know-it-all already has it all figured out, so obviously they don't need me. Right? You got all the answers. Check the box once doesn't happen anymore. They have to know going into it that it's going to be a two-way street where reverse mentoring can happen, right? And as the younger generation, we have to take some ownership on that too, of understand how it can come across when you are mentoring that more experienced person, right? To not come across as a little know-it-all, to be sensitive to that fact it's a two-way street. The other thing you have to be aware of is most of the people that we tap and ask them to mentor are already pretty stressed out with a lot on their plate. And we're like, oh, by the way, can you make time to do this? Versus it's something that's actually built into their new job description. I mean, I would encourage you to say, you know what, if it's that important, if knowledge transfer and mentoring becomes that important to us, it's going to be built into the job description, and we're going to acknowledge that it takes time and effort. And then the final step we're going to do, and I would so encourage you, is you have to celebrate the mentors that do a great job. Celebrate those individuals. Highlight them. Hold them up. Celebrate the fact that they're openly willing to do this. Because we just like, oh, that's nice, I'm glad you did that, versus making it a big deal. This is a generation, they're still idealistic, they're still optimistic, they still want to make an impact and leave a lasting legacy. Hold them up and celebrate them. Ask them to be re-engaged. Ask them to step forward. And I think we will find this trend, we can overcome it a little bit. That's one of my big thoughts with baby boomers. So, Generation X. Xers, where are my Xers at in this room? We gotta celebrate our Xers. It's like all this talk about boomers and millennials, enough already. Let's talk about us. So I mentioned in the program Tom Hanks' comment about TV for baby boomers, right? Baby boomers were the first generation of kids to grow up with television. They were the first TV kids. But for Generation X, you were really the kids who were around for the explosion of the media, right? By the age of 20, the average Xer had watched 23,000 hours of television. It's a lot of TV. Right, and that relationship with TV starts in 1969 with a little TV show called Sesame Street. Correct. How many of you grew up watching Sesame Street? No, do you know why Sesame Street was created? Two reasons. One is a babysitter, right? Really? And Head Start, help kids get ramped up for school, right? So by the time they went to kindergarten, first grade, they had a head start, they had a jump. Babysitter and a jump start. So it starts in 1969, that relationship with TV. Fast forward to 1980 to a little television show called I Want My MTV. How many of you extras can remember 24-hour music video marathon sessions? Yes! That's what I'm talking about. You know, how many, can you remember, what were some of your early music videos? Can you remember? What were they? Thriller, of course, right? And Video Killed the Radio Star. Take on Me. What's the group that sang that? ABBA. Thank you, that's what I thought. I knew it, okay? I knew that. Did you see her face? ABBA. Duh. Aha, I mean not Abba. Aha. Typical Xers. Oh God, stupid millennials. Now here's the thing. Xers weren't only watching MTV though. Right? We also saw the explosion of 24-hour news media. CNN pops up on the scene. And Xers are being exposed now to a very different kind of news than baby boomers. What you saw. Boomers, you grew up watching 30 minutes of nightly news brought to you by who? Walter Cronkite. Correct. Correct. And does anybody remember what Walter's, one of his nicknames, he was often referred to as the most trusted man in America. Correct. Now, can you imagine a news person being known as the most trusted person in America today? Okay, that shift, that dynamic took place during Generation X's formative years. So we had a chance to spend some time with Diane Sawyer, and Diane talked to us about that transition in news. And she was like, honestly, when the cable networks came on, it became a ratings race. How fast can you go to air with a story? If we don't have it right, we'll simply retract it. Right? So, I mean, think about some of the stories you hear today. I wish I could count how many times I hear alleged before a comment or a story. Alleged, we might as well just call it a rumor. You know, really. And so Xers, you think about the stories that are coming across the airwaves of the 1980s on top of it, between AIDS, war on drugs, crack cocaine, Chernobyl, Black Tuesday on Wall Street. Now there's an interesting one. So let's take, because this starts to shape how a generation views institutions and our therefore trust in institutions and leadership. So when I say an institution like NASA to baby boomers, my boomers in the room, I say NASA to you, and what's the first thought that comes to your mind? The moon landing, which you brought up right away. The moon landing, which is this incredibly proud, prideful moment for the whole world. It's a mindset of we could put our faith and trust in institutions, we all support it, and we can do great things together. Now, when I say NASA to you, Generation Xers, what's the first thought, first memory that comes into your mind? Challenger explosion. How many of you were in school when you saw that blow up? Okay? They wheeled that TV in on the cart. I mean, just as a side note, can we just all acknowledge, when you saw the cart on the TV on the cart come down the hallway, you knew it was going to be a good day, right? Like, it's just like, please let that be coming to my classroom. Please, 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 please. They rolled the TV in when we saw that blow up. Now, here's the thing, gang. It's when you dig a little bit deeper into the event. It's the first time now for this generation, for kids, youth, they watch this happen. Simultaneously, they looked to the adult in their life, and the adults did not have the answer. That is an unsettling feeling. Teachers don't know what to say, they don't know how to explain. How do you explain what just happened? They don't even know. And then the news cycle picks it up, and it replayed over and over and over again. And then the questions of, did we know? Could this have been prevented? And so this mindset starts to seep in. If you can't trust NASA, who can you trust? And that then boils over into leadership and leadership messages. They're also watching their institution of marriage crumble on the home front as well. The divorce rate triples during the birth years of Generation X. So you have a whole generation of kids who grow up in a very different home than baby boomers. Boomers, even if your mom wasn't a stay-at-home mom, if you were in the neighborhood, Billy's mom was just as likely to tan your hide as your own mother was, right? Or Janie's mom or whoever. For Xers, least parented, least supervised generation of kids in history. So that means they had to make their own meals, do their own homework, navigate their own time on their own. Incredibly self-sufficient soul survivors. How many of you Xers, you came home from school by yourself? At least part of the time. And you're hanging out at friends' houses by yourself. You're also watching your parents give their lives to institutions or organizations only to be let go of as we start to see the massive layoffs and the shift in corporate loyalty to employees change late 70s, early 80s. And that's funny. You think, okay, so then how does that influence later on? You look at, I'm going to show you a campaign with some interesting messaging. This was from Monster, it came out in the late 90s, and it was directed exactly at Xers, talking to them about what they saw during their formative years. We didn't check this volume on this computer, so we'll have to just see how this sounds. Let me make sure I know where the volume's at in case it's hot. Can you run the volume back there too? All right, let's hit this and see.
When I grow up.
Well, it would help if we had a cord up here too. Is there volume up here? I did all this tee up and now you're gonna be like, can't we see the video? I don't see any volume cord up here. Well, I'll play it and maybe you can hear it. If not, you, my friend, you. Can we give her a round of applause? Duh. Put the microphone.
When I grow up, I want to file all day.
I want to claw my way up to middle management, be replaced on a whim. I want to have a brown nose.
I want to be a yes man, yes woman.
Yes, sir. Coming, sir.
Anything for a raise, sir.
When I grow up,
I want to be underappreciated.
be paid less for doing the same job.
I want to be forced into early retirement.
Aren't you glad you saw that? Painful. How many of you do you remember that? Do you remember that commercial? Remember that campaign? So what Monster did there that was so brilliant is they said to a whole generation of youth, look, we know what you saw when you were growing up, right? And as you venture out into your career, we're going to give you the tools and the resources and the platform so that your security is not dependent upon the institution, but that you can always take care of yourself. Your resume's tuned up, your network's in place, you can always land on your feet, you can take care of yourself. And it further drives and builds this generation's very independent and entrepreneurial mindset. You know what? Get thrown off the deep end, I'll figure it out, I'll make it work. And because they saw so many institutions called into question, so many politicians say one thing and do another, right? During Xer's formative years, they saw one president look into the camera and say, I am not a crook, and another say, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, right? Directly into the camera, the president. So this leads to a generation that is hugely skeptical as well. Very skeptical generation. Now, I usually get someone to push back a little bit and be like, man, that's such a big statement to say this whole group is skeptical. I mean, is there any data? Is there any numbers to back that up? Skeptical Xer is the one usually asking that. And we actually did find a great report came out from a group out of New York called Third Millennium. And they found, I don't have this slide, but it's pretty funny. They found that Xers actually believe they have a greater chance of seeing a UFO in their lifetime than a Social Security check. That came out a few years ago, and it's like every year it just gets less and less funny. Most people are just like, yeah, that's pretty much true. But this skepticism has big implications as Xers then entered the workplace. Because for most Xers, they entered the world where baby boomers and traditionalists had kind of established the way things went. And one of the biggest collisions was no way, no how was Generation X going to do something just because that's the way it's always been done. In fact, that's like nails on a chalkboard for Generation X. Like, just because that's the way it's always been done doesn't mean it couldn't be done different or better. And so Xers came in and immediately started to question, started to challenge, and right away got labeled as well. A lot of labels thrown around for Generation X too. Not team players, disrespectful, won't get with the program, difficult to get buy-in. But if you ask most Xers will say, like, why do you question? Even if it's just like a new policy we're rolling out, it's like, well, why are we doing that? And what about this? Most Xers are like, you know what? I question and I challenge because I care, because I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Because I've seen so many leaders say to me, just trust me. I just need you to trust me. And they're like, just trust you? You're going to have to do better than that. You're going to have to prove it to me to get that buy-in. And so working with that skepticism is hugely important with our Gen X team members. The skepticism, but also that independent work style. Again, most Xers got thrown off the deep end. When they came into the industry to work, most of the time it was like, for Xers, here was your orientation. Great, here's your desk, here's your stuff. If you have any questions, I'll be over there. Best of luck, there's the bathroom. There you go. And for most Xers, again, your whole life has been based off this. If you're still here, you're like, okay, you figured it out, you bought in, you made it work. And as a result, kind of adapted this new way of what I would call Xer collaboration, which is, Xer collaboration looks a little bit like this. Tell me what you want. Tell me when you want it. Tell me where you want it. Now, I'm going to go away. Hopefully, you're going to go away, and I can get the job done. But now Xers, and that's worked great for you. Now Xers are managing millennials who have grown up doing everything in teams, in groups. And so Xers, you say to your millennials, you're like, I didn't want to be micromanaged when I was first starting out, so I don't want to get in your way. So here's your desk, here's your stuff. If you have any problems, I'll be over there. And you go to walk out the door, and your millennials are like, hey, man, where are you going? I thought we were going to do this together. And most Xers are like, it is like one big giant kumbaya chat room with your generation. The whole team doesn't need to get together to execute every single function, right? It doesn't take 5 people to do that. Get away from each other and get away from me. And then what was that millennial? They're like, my manager hates me. This is real life. We're having a real life conversation right now. They don't like me. Why? Why is that? Because their door is always closed. Or, they'll be like, every time I try to come into their office and hang out, they like run up to the door and meet me at the door and quickly shoo me away. And I asked the manager about that, and they're like, yeah, because they come in and just sit on my chair in the corner. And I'll look up from my computer and be like, can I help you? And they're like, no, I just wanted to be in here with you. Just to be practical about that, we just have to have some frank discussions on both sides, right? Millennials have to get up to speed on how to operate and work with Xers. Most of the time, when I teach young new hires how to manage their Gen X managers, I'm like, they're independent operators, right? They didn't grow up doing everything in groups. Don't try to do everything in a group with them. You need to showcase you can be a strong individual contributor to them. That's what they want to see. You got to coach them up on that a little bit. And Xers, you're going to have to learn to embrace a little bit more of a collaborative leadership style and figure out what collaboration looks like and means for you, and then communicate that with your teams, because it's just very different. So the independence and the skepticism we want to watch and be mindful of with Xers. My last comment there is, we talk about millennials wanting a seat at the table. Xers in many cases have been waiting in the wings for a long time to step up into some big leadership roles. I mean, in some industries, we've called that trend the gray ceiling. No offense, baby boomers, but it's like literally Xers feeling stuck under the gray ceiling of this massive group of boomers who have been in these key leadership roles and are maybe not retiring. And Xers, of course, are feeling like, I'm ready to step up. Not to mention the fact that now I have these 25-year-olds who are, demanding a seat at the table. You have to understand, Xers are squeezed in between the two of them. And so if you're a boomer and you're thinking about, I do have some Xers that are probably chomping at the bit, you got to think about where could I potentially delegate some opportunities, take some things off my plate, some meaningful opportunities. Even if you can't give an Xer an actual position, can you give them some projects to work on because they're ready to step up, and we need them to. We need Xer leadership in this mix as well. Our baby boomers, watch out for they've retired without telling you. Want to re-engage, idealistic, optimistic group. With that, I want to open it up. So we've got about 20 minutes, a little bit more if we want, to talk about anything that you found interesting or disagree with or are struggling with inside with your teams, or things that came to mind from the program this morning, or things that we just talked about right now. I kind of want it to be a little bit of a open discussion. So if there's questions, comments, you can fire away. Yes?
So
Yes?
I work in one department, managed with people that have been in the
Yeah.
My phone, I'm not on my phone all the time. So I decided that I would adapt to their texting because that's what they're used to. It doesn't have to do with what I might be used to. But I felt like I would get more if I just adapted and allowed them to continue to text.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what they've done their whole life.
Yep.
And it's worked out really well for me. I think it helps too. I have a 23-year-old.
Sure.
So the texting part of
You know when you call your 23-year-old, is she or she picking up the phone? Heck no, they're not. Okay. Got a little bit of a mix.
right. And so it was just hard at first. I'm thinking to myself, how dare them? Because that's not the way I
I love that first reaction though. So let's just pause there. First of all, is anyone else running it? You know, that whole dynamic of texting versus phone call have been there. Anybody ever felt like she felt just like, how dare they? I love that language because it's so raw and real though, especially as we think about some of the unwritten rules of the hierarchy that we grew up in around proper etiquette, around communication, right? Where now texting, is that appropriate? Is that okay? I mean, these are actually big conversations to have. And it's funny that you would say what you did because that's actually the advice that I give to people. I want to say bravo and congratulations to you. I always tell everyone, it's like we are living in this, again, very half-changed world. And it is now it's not about how you want to communicate. It's about how the person you're trying to reach wants to be communicated with. And that goes for all of us. This is not an advocacy for we should all be digital and you all need to get with the program. I say to my generation too, if you're working with a colleague or a client who prefers and appreciates a phone call, you pick up the phone and call them. If you've got a colleague who appreciates face-to-face conversation and you can make an effort to go down and actually engage in their cube face-to-face, you've got to do that. You have to make that effort. You've got to extend that forward. And as people will be like, it's so inefficient though. Young people are like, it's so inefficient. I could have just sent them an instant message or a text message. You want me to walk over them? You got to meet people in the middle. And it goes both ways. You have to know on the phone call front, you know, you said it, they grew up texting. The phone is an interesting dynamic. How many of you have ever made, at any time in your professional career, a sales call, a cold call? Anyone ever made a cold call? Or you just had to call a complete stranger? The first time you did that, do you remember how nervous you were? Just like gut-wrenchingly nervous, like literally is like shaking on the phone. Hello? It's so weird. How you felt in that moment, that's how millennials feel when you ask them to call anyone. Ever. And so what happens, and then I'm going to come to you. And this becomes about being very intentional in directions that we give. If you say, for instance, get a hold of Jan and get that information for us because we need that before we can move forward. You've said this before. Or get a hold of Bob and get that information. You circle back 2 hours later and you're like, did you get a hold of Jan? And you're like, no. Well, why not? Well, I sent him an email and they didn't write back. And you're like, well, did you call him? No. Well, pick up the phone and call him. Why didn't you pick up the phone and call him? It's like, so, and it seems silly, but in that moment, it's like if what your intention was, this is urgent, I want you to pick up the phone and call them for that information. That's actually what you have to say. Now, the flip side of this, and this is fascinating, I just did a focus group with a bunch of young real estate professionals, millennials, and we were talking about, because every industry is dealing with this, texting versus phone calls, what's appropriate with clients. These young people, and these are very successful, six-figure plus professionals, they said it is rude to call someone. It's rude because do you know what that's saying? I was like, really? They're like, it is saying that what I want is more important than whatever it is that you're doing right now. I am interrupting whatever it is you're doing. Some of you are thinking, well, I have no problem just rolling into my office, interrupting me any other time, so I don't know why on the phone it would be a big deal. But in this scenario, they're like, if I send them a text message, to your point, they can answer it and respond when they have time, when it works for them. If I call them, I'm saying, hey, talk to me right now. So again, just this dynamic of, I can't believe how rude it is that they would text to, I can't believe how rude it is to make a phone call. We have all of these dynamics, we just don't talk about it. So communication is a really, really big one. Yes?
Well, to your point there, I really love and know that I can get a hold of a millennial like that on a text.
Yeah.
There's such a comfort to that when I have activities that need to have a text, that I can quickly make a text and they'll answer.
Yeah.
Text me, it's Dave.
She's like, can I get an amen? Yes, me too.
And I'm trying to, I'm getting better at it because I manage so many millennials.
Yep.
But I love that I can trust that about them.
Yeah.
I mean, to my nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
I think, wow, but if I go to call,
Yeah, forget it.
it's days for them to call me back.
Of course.
So it's a reverse thing, but it's funny, I find comfort in that.
I love that. I love that. So I think what we all have to do, whether again it's our colleagues or it's a client, we have to start asking each other, what's the best way to communicate with you? What's your preferred method of communication? I mean, I'm even encouraging people to put that on forms now for follow-up of just check the box. Because we're not going to judge. It's not that it's right or wrong, but I want to be adaptable. And that, again, I can't stress how much it goes for us too. I also don't want to assume that my baby boomer client can't text. Let me tell you something, I try to check in when I show up at events and I've got boomer clients, and I was like, I can call you when I get on site, and this really cool boomer event planner, she's like, you can text me. What do you think, I don't know how to text? Right, like that, but that's a mistake I don't want to make of don't also then make someone feel like they're inept and don't know how to do these things. I should have said, Jen, how do you want me to communicate with you when I get in, right? That's where we win. Someone had their hand up here. You ma'am? Yeah. Yes. 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 Yep.
And we're really having to say, okay, if you get beyond this, it's time to get it over together.
It's great. Did everybody hear that? She was just talking about, communication, digital communication, whether it's emails or instant message. At what point do you need to know the little bell goes off, I need to pick up the phone and call this person, right? Because we've gone back and forth 10 times. There's obviously some misinterpretation here, and how do you know when? But just the fact that you acknowledge it and have a conversation around that is step one. And then we can say, and maybe it's not a rigid policy, after every 5, then call, but be aware of it, right, gang? Yes.
I think one of the problems with a lot of the younger generation, I'm kind of right on that order,
Yep.
is that because so many people have grown up with that technology, that they do not know how to have that interpersonal communication with people.
Yeah.
They don't know how to have a face-to-face conversation and what that actually looks like.
Agreed.
They'd rather do the texting or the email because it takes the personal being out of it, and because they don't have to do it.
So to that point, we're encouraging more and more clients to say, you might have to build some face-to-face communication skills, especially conflict resolution. It's very easy to deal with conflict via screen, right? I don't have to deal with it face-to-face. These things actually have to be built in now on the front end. And I have a lot of people who are like, are you kidding me? We're gonna have to invest money now to train people how to have face-to-face conversations. It's ridiculous. And the only thing I can say is, just to give it some perspective, how many of you have been around long enough where you remember when email first came into the workplace in the mid-90s? Okay, a lot of you, great, so you'll remember this. They had classes for you on how to use email, right? Because it was a new form of communication. You had grown up using face-to-face or the phone. Now you had something new, and so we trained on it and it was fine. The exact opposite is playing out now. They've used technology and digital. The face-to-face is new, and so we need some training, right? So, gentleman in the back, you had your hand. Yes?
Yeah, my question is about training, because there's a constant need for education, and there's so much change in our environment. How do millennials learn?
That's a big, big question. I guess the easy answer is by doing very experiential, very interactive. The whole just putting everybody in a room and talking at them or push and play on a video, it totally doesn't work. It has to be very interactive. They've got to work on things together. We've got to break it up. Again, a shorter attention span, which it's impacting all of us, right? To put them in a room and do 3 hours of training, or to hand them a booklet, right, with 300 words, our employee manual. I want you to read this, and then that's going to be really tough to keep them engaged. And so very interactive. Even things like, I try to play videos throughout my presentations too, because for all of us, it's like, I know if I don't give you some mental candy after about 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to lose you, right? The phones are going to come out. And so I'm just going to feed into that. Phones are, I don't take it personally anymore now. I just tell myself, oh, that person's tweeting something brilliant I said. Love it. Oh, there's another tweet that just went out. Yes.
Question, what about, I worry about social skills. Like my kids
Yeah.
are Generation Edge, and they'll text me and I refuse to respond unless it's proper English. Because I feel like they're not learning.
Yeah.
And when they write papers and I read it, it's wrong.
She's talking about social skills. This is a big question. One thing I would say is just every generation has always shunned the next generation for their lack of, right, to a certain extent, right? Every generation has this, they're losing the ability to write in cursive.
When you were talking about how they get very nervous to speak on the phone, how do you overcome that?
So to build off this question / I'll have parents sometimes ask me too, just like, well, how much screen time is too much screen time? And how do we work around some of these bigger questions? And I just said, number one, I want to acknowledge anyone who's a parent today is parenting in probably one of the most difficult times ever, just because it's such uncharted waters, right? No generation of parents has been easy, but this, with new digital technology, is very challenging of what's right and what's wrong. And I'm not here to say this or that, but what I will say is simply this. You will set forward the values that you want your children to have by your actions. So if you want things like, I want us to value being outside and in nature. I want us to value face-to-face conversations, to put our screens down. You can't immediately after dinner pull your laptop up and have your face in a screen. You can't have your phone out when you're at the soccer game the whole time, because those are the values then that you're showing that are important to you and the family. If it is important to have more face-to-face, if it is important to get outside and to enjoy the outdoors, you have to be an example of that. That's the best you can do. But we're living in this different world where, will it be important to be able to write in cursive? Will it be important to spell correctly? I don't have the answer to that. Technology is pushing us down a place where it's becoming, we have the tools where it's not as important. But if you value it, if you say, well, what if those technologies go away? You need to be able to write. You feel like that could be an advantage for them later in life. Then you'd have to communicate that and really show that those values are important as a whole. Yes?
I have a question. I'm a millennial, and I'm managing other millennials, and I have 2 baby boomers. They work really slow, and they can't keep up with the time. They can't. Like, I have 7, 8, 9, 10.
You don't say that to them like that, do you?
It's 7, 8. I'll give my millennials 7 or 8 or 9 tasks, and
Yeah.
we'll talk, we'll chat, we run around, we do everything in the office, and we get it done. And then the baby boomers, I noticed they have to do one assignment, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then they can't answer the phone if they're doing this, and then so I just don't know how I can find a balance between
So to your point, it's like it's linear, it's linear versus, or we'll say analog versus digital. So most boomers grew up and were drilled into them. You think about math. It's like you follow steps 1 through 6, and you do not go from step 1 to step 6 without doing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's what you were rewarded for. You grew up in a world of show your work, right? You did math on show your work. Millennials grew up taking time tests. How fast can you go from A to Z? Not to mention, if their favorite theme word is disruption, to disrupt every process. The whole theme around disruption is, how can I get from here to here faster? And they've been rewarded for that process. And so, of course, they're going to attack it in 2 different ways. Now, when it comes to efficiency, that might allow them to do certain things faster. I don't know if there's ever any errors in there, or sometimes maybe there is and they need to slow down a little bit. All I can say to you is, you have some conversations and look at where can you leverage your boomers' best assets, whether it's around their knowledge, whether it's around their mentoring. Are there things that they can be doing that better leverages what they bring to the table? And if there's more of the process, task-oriented stuff that could be pushed to this group, do that. If you need them all to do the same and they just simply cannot meet performance marks, then you have to, that's a larger conversation about how do we improve upon that, what can we work on, how can we get there, and if they simply can't, which in some industries that's the case, is there training opportunities that they can take advantage of? And if they simply don't want it, that's another conversation you have to have. But it requires us to take a step back and to say, they grew up in this very different world. What assets do they have available to us? How can I leverage them? Because they're not going to be the same. Yes? Adapt. It is hugely. It is the word.
People that are born in the 60s and some that we work with that are born in the 80s or 90s, we just have to learn to adapt. It'll just be a much easier transition. And in that adaptation that we do, we can learn from the baby boomers, the Gen X, whoever. And I think that's the most.
Why don't we? So I agree with you completely. Why don't we?
I wanted to, in regards to that, I wanted to kind of bring it back to the thing you talked about in the plenary session, in which we're talking about hierarchical organizations and hybrid organization. And I think one thing that we've been using a little bit in the conversation here is the institution that we work in, which is really different
Yep.
from other organizations. And I work in a kind of small mid-level court where we have 500 employees, and I'm a court administrator, so I'm the person who's between a lot of other people, sometimes 7 different levels up to the judges. And we can work organizationally to do a lot of things we're talking about here, and working with texting, a lot of what we do already.
Yep.
But there's certain levels, a certain point where it's just not going to happen, certainly not for a very long period of time, where you're going to have individuals who are used to texting, used to working in a kind of organizational way, 20-something or 20 calls right now to be low-level individuals. We're going to be working with judges. I mean, it's just not going to happen. They're not going to walk into a chamber and say, Judge, can I talk about that case? I mean, it's just not going to happen. And I think working in that, and how do you work with that, trying to take those.
Why isn't that? Because they're too young and they're too entry level.
No, I think a judge is just not going to entertain a probation officer or a clerk just walking into their chamber. There's a higher level organization, partially through the whole process that we work in, the way cases move up into the system, the way cases are decided,
Yeah.
the whole structure of what we're about.
Yep.
Even with all the changes going on, it's not going to happen. And part of that comes from the fact that they are not knowledgeable enough to know enough about what is going on up there.
Is that potentially detrimental?
Well, and I think
I mean, this question is not detrimental to who, from the judge's perspective.
Society?
well, and is there
All
a
of us?
hierarchy in politics?
Of course there is. Just to the only thing you're totally right. Every industry, every group will have to kind of navigate what this means for them. But I will say millennials are not just the 23-year-old entry levels. We also have, leading edge are 32 and 33 who are stepping into some pretty big roles, who see the world like that and are now in positions where they're going to be able to interact with a higher level, and makes it a very prevalent, relevant issue today versus it's 10 years away. It's actually at our doorstep right now. You were going to say something. I saw your hand go up right away.
Because he's wrong. No offense. I'm a millennial, and I'm court administrator, and I go into my judge's chamber, and I'm like, hey,
You did the exact same scenario.
so like, you can't say, oh, they're too young, they want to get into this position, because in my court, I am in that position.
But actually, I didn't say that. What I said was that there's positions in which.
Of course.
That's a totally different.
You're not wrong. Neither are right or wrong. But do you see how we are living in this exactly like we put on the slide? This kind of half-changed world. And part of it is just having an honest conversation about where each of us are at with our cultures and our institution, and do we want to move forward into a place where a clerk of the court could go in and have that conversation, or we say we want that separation. The hierarchy is important to us, the whatever rules, but let's be transparent about that and honest with ourselves. Ma'am, with the phone, you have your hand up for a very long time. You're texting and you're multitasking there. See, she was trying to send out a tweet. I love it.
My question is, in the ICM training session that we had yesterday, a lot of us around the table, our biggest challenge is how do we retain millennials?
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up with this, and if we have other questions, I'll stick around and answer. So, top 5 things. Is that cut off? Yeah, it looks like it's a little cut off. This is the top 5 things workforce of the future look for in a leader. Just so we can get really, really specific. This is why I did it. This has come directly from research and focus groups we've done. So number 1 will help me navigate a career path. This is what they're looking for in a manager or a leader. Number 1, someone who will help me navigate a career path. So they're gonna come in and it's like, how do I get from here to where I wanna go? And for those people who come in and are like, I want to be, in the corner office in 1 year, you got to nip that in the bud on day 1. That's about setting expectations very, very early on. We don't like to talk about real expectations when we're in the recruiting process because we don't want to scare them away. But if we set expectations clear, this is what it really takes to get here. But what you have to know is we've grown up with the mindset of that we're all overachievers. And just because it takes normal people 3 years to get there, I'm an overachiever and I can probably do it in a year and a half. So you say everyone we hire is an overachiever, right? And this is how it typically goes. Now that doesn't mean that there's not room for some interpretation, but can help me navigate a career path. What you have to keep in mind, that doesn't necessarily just mean up. If they're asking for something else, they'll maybe use the language of a higher position. It's just because that's what they've been hearing other people say. It's about impactful, interesting work because I'm bored. I want to get to the next thing and pick up a new skill. So it's not always just about up, but we've got to be having these conversations early. Secondarily, will give me straight, consistent feedback. All right? And that just looks and feels different because, again, for most of you, you grew up in a world where it was like feedback came, initially, it's like if you're not getting yelled at, you're probably doing just fine. And that's your feedback. And after that, we kind of started to incorporate a little bit more formal annual reviews. This is when you hear it. To where now it's like, it doesn't have to be some big formal thing, but even just a quick check-in, whether it's every couple of days or once a week or whatever you find that teammate needs, they need that more consistent reinforced feedback. Will mentor and coach me. We talked about some of the dynamic around mentoring earlier, and I really hope you take that to heart. We can't just put onto our baby boomers and leading Xers, hey, go mentor this person without acknowledging their workload, celebrating them, and knowing that it's going to be a two-way street. Reverse mentoring is going to happen. Will sponsor me for formal development programs. I've grown up in a world where it's all about continuing to refine your skills, learn new skills, because stuff is constantly changing. It's like there was always a new program coming out, a new upgrade, a new version that you had to learn. So opportunities to keep learning and growing. And then last, is comfortable with flexible schedules. And I know that's a whole nother can of worms about, especially where you work, exactly about when and where work happens. And the only thing I'll throw out there for you to consider is, we're in a world where, yes, you might say, for us, even though work can happen outside of our walls, for us, you have to be here from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, even if they're not client-facing. But you have to acknowledge how many of you, the first thing you look at when you wake up in the morning is check email. The last thing you look at before you go to bed, you check email, right? We are connected 24/7. And this generation knows that. And so it's like, if we're going to demand people to be physically present from 9 to 5, but also demand mental and creative thinking, outside of the 6 or 7 hours that we're sleeping. I know some cultures where they play the game of who can send the latest text message, the latest email, getting emails at 11 p.m. and it's like, I want to get one in at 11:30 because I'm on top of it, right? We get into that culture starts to breed. And so it's like, if that's true, we're always connected, is there some potential flexibility to incorporate? Because I will remind you, you're also recruiting talent that other industries are trying to pull away. Yes, you want smart people, capable people. Other industries are saying, listen, you can work, we'll give you more flexibility. And I'm not advocating that we're all gonna work at home in our pajamas 5 days a week. No one actually wants that. But to be able to have some control and some flexibility, and that's not just millennials. There is not a single generation, I believe, that wouldn't like a little bit more flexibility in their days and in their work. This is where we live. This is the world we live in now. But we have to be willing to have conversations about it instead of just saying blanket policy, it is what it is, and that's the way it's gonna be. It goes back to, ma'am, your point, adaptability. We all have to be flexible, meet people in the middle. Thanks for hanging out. I'm gonna hang out for a while if you have more questions. Thank you.